And we have a couple items to discuss. I'll turn it back over to Scott.
So Mayor, City Council, the first discussion I'd like to talk to you about is the MOU for the Hawks Glen Stormwater System. And I'm going to share a screen, maybe help the conversation here just a little bit. So give me a thumbs up when you can see the presentation. Great. So you really can't talk about the Hawks Glen Stormwater System without talking about the Marvin Road annexation. You may recall this actually goes back to November of 2018. This was an owner-initiated petition. It had soon developed into a conversation to include Nisqually Middle School, the RAC. We have city property to the east of the RAC, or I'm sorry, to the west of the RAC, and then also Rainier Mobile Home Park, and also included Lacey Fire District 3. So that was sent to the BRB in actually in late 2018. Thurston County petitioned that, and they actually increased the size to 509 acres. The original was about 249. And that included neighborhoods further into Tanglewild, like Tanglewild East and Sherwood Firs and Royal Oaks, and also Hawks Glen. That resulted in a number of meetings between Thurston County and city staff, and a revised version of that annexation took place that took about 100 acres off of that, but it still included neighborhoods to the west of Hawks Glen and also Hawks Ridge to the north of the Marvin Road intersection. That resulted in the discovery, when they went through the public hearing process, of a stormwater facility in the Hawks Glen neighborhood. And that is the result of why we're here to talk about an MOU. So what was discovered was that there was a stormwater facility built really in the late 90s in response to a significant amount of rainfall in the mid 90s. We had flooding, if you may recall, in the Northwest about 1996 due to heavy rains. This neighborhood was impacted, and the solution was to create 2 sub pump stations, if you will, to draw the water out of the high groundwater table, put it into a detention pond. And then there's about 400 feet of pipe that it went into from a force main, and eventually it outfalls at the banks of McAllister Creek. So again, that paused that annexation because, again, this was a new stormwater facility that didn't know how it operated. We didn't know the scale. We didn't know the scope, what the permitting was involved. And the other problematic issue was that even if we annex the entire portion of Hawks Glen subdivision, or even further east to our UGA, there's still going to be a portion of the system that will be outside of Lacey's urban growth area. So that kind of put a pause to issues we were working through, trying to figure out what is the arrangement we can work through with the county in terms of joint ownership, if there was ever repairs or upgrades or just even operations. And then obviously COVID-19 paused some of those discussions. So we did reconvene early this year, and we've now come to a resolution on the Hawks Glen stormwater system. And I'm just going to highlight the main points, and this is in the staff report that's included within the packet. So essentially the main points are this, is that we own what's currently within our city boundaries, or the newly annexed area that we're considering. We would own what we own, and we'd operate what we own in our city limits. Likewise, Thurston County would be responsible for the ownership of the facility that's within their jurisdictional boundaries. They would own and operate and be responsible for that. There will be a 1-year transition once the MOU is signed. Obviously, there's electrical panels that operate the pump. So if there was an electrical outage, there's response issues that we need to get to. So the county has agreed to operate that for a year, so we get an orderly transition of the 2 pump stations that the system is part of. Had a lot of discussion about what if the system ever needed to be repaired, or if there was a grant possibility. Basically what the agreement says that we agree to work in good faith to address those issues. The other part of this agreement is it's going to be a 10-year agreement with a clause in it that says before it expires, we will sit down and try to negotiate an extension, because essentially we will be married with this facility for this foreseeable future. And then just the last part of it is that, you know, we own, or we're responsible for our own liability when it comes to this system. So those are really the main points of the MOU. Next steps, and obviously we'll have questions about this if you do, but if you approve of this, I would need authority to sign the MOU. If the MOU is now signed, the county's already signed their portion, they're waiting for our signature. This would then allow the potential to revisit the Marvin Road Stillicum annexation, which we have tentatively scheduled for May 20th. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen and then answer any questions you may have related to the facility.
Are we taking action right now to authorize you?
You know,
Yes,
quite frankly, you could. It doesn't
Yes.
necessarily have to be.
I'll make a motion.
yeah, go ahead.
I'll make a motion to authorize the city manager to sign the MOU with Thurston County for the stormwater project.
I'll second it. Discussion, Councilmember Cox.
Well, I had long hoped that reasonable minds, that Lacey and the county could come together and come up with a plan for addressing this very funky system. And you have, and thank you.
Mhm. Councilmember Greenstein.
Well, I have concerns with the MOU. I'm not very comfortable with, if you want to, I don't know if you want to bring it back up, but that will work in good faith. And that's really very undefined and very non-determinant. And what does that really mean? I mean, you know, we're picking up the liability, we're picking up something that we know would never meet current code, would never be, you know, they'd never allow us to build something like that today. I'm just, that in good work in good faith just doesn't tell me much.
So let me try to answer that two ways, and then I'll have Dave maybe also respond to. I think what both parties somewhat agreed to the fact that there are too many potential variables and possibilities that we can't predict, and trying to incorporate those into an agreement was somewhat impossible. The county will contend, and they've asserted that position multiple times, that the current system meets all requirements at the time that it was built. So from that standpoint, they believe it's in compliance. If you want to say it's grandfathered, they do not believe that this system is out of compliance. Granted, if the system were to be expanded or changed, then that would be a different discussion point. So from that standpoint, there was at least an acknowledgement that, again, if we annex this area and we do have ownership of each portions of the system, how do we try to address those issues? And I guess there was, you know, future oriented language that said we agree to be good partners and work together toward a solution.
Dave, you want
To me, that says you're basically Lacey's got holding the bag on the whole thing.
Well, and then maybe Dave can insert there in terms of, if we're going to talk about maybe just the legal reality of just having a system that's jointly owned.
Yeah, and I think Scott said it well, and I agree with you, Councilmember Greenstein. It's obviously the good faith language is it's not strong language holding either party to any particular action, and that is by design, as the city manager mentioned. It's a joint, upon annexation, this would be a joint facility, and there's just no way around that. There's nothing to believe that there's no concerns with the facility as present. There's no concerns with the outfall. Ecology has been involved with this. There's nothing that anybody's aware of where there would ever be a problem. So it's very difficult to craft language around what would we do if there was in fact a problem. If we didn't have an agreement, we would be left almost in, I mean, this is better obviously than not having any agreement, but if we didn't, and that the parties couldn't agree as to who was liable, you know, ultimately there's a chance that you could end up in court litigating those facts. We did, and that's still possible. I mean, we included an alternative dispute resolution clause in the agreement, which kind of strengthens, I think, the good faith efforts that each party would exert if there was a problem. But at the end of the day, we just don't know what's going to happen. There's, again, I'll repeat, there's no reason to believe anything will happen. And so this language is what we have, and it's been a while that we've been working on this, communicating with our counterparts with the county. And
So, yeah. Before I go to you, Deputy Mayor, I just want to say that this is one of those issues that I was sort of been harping on for a long time. That Scott can tell you, he's probably sick of me saying we need to come to a resolution on this. I mean, it's been over 2 years, right? I mean, since basically we started talking about this, and And both parties were just sort of pointing fingers at each other. It's like, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And so, finally, at some point, it's like, I'm like, we have to figure out a solution here. And I do think this is, every indication on this is that we will work together. We'll continue to work together. The county is, we'll try to be a government. There's no guarantees in life, right? And we could have gone through another process, right? Got rid of this annexation altogether, started the process over, tried to exclude this once again. We've been here for another year, and this is the RAC. This was an owner, remember, initiated annexation. This wasn't the city of Lacey, who's been waiting this entire time on this. I'm like, come on, we can figure out a solution here. I mean, I'm so sick of no answers to big problems that we have in when it comes to local government. And I sort of, freaked out about this, saying, come on, we have to figure a way to come up with a solution. And so this is the solution. I'm comfortable with the solution. It's time to move forward. This is in our urban growth area. This should become City of Lacey, regardless of this last minute thing that we found about this stormwater system. So I'm heavily suggesting that we have the city manager sign this agreement and we get on with it, so we can have this annexation finally come into the City of Lacey. Deputy Mayor, then I'll go to Councilmember Stedman.
So I think Dave answered my question, or Scott. My original concern is that ecology could come back, because this is Allison. Is it Allison Springs? Well, it's the springs there. But if it's already grandfathered in and they're comfortable with it, then we should be comfortable with it. If there's, they obviously, it's ecology, you really have to worry about, not the county so much. And it sounds like there's no problem from their viewpoint. So it's a good workaround, I think.
Councilmember Stedman.
Well, I mean, we were trying to come up with a solution or a resolution last several years, and but keep in mind, there's a new administration last several months, so maybe they value this a little bit more, and we shall see. But I support it regardless. We're moving forward. I believe it's works and benefits all the residents in the area.
Yeah. Lenny?
Has ecology been involved in this conversation?
I haven't spoken with ecology directly, no.
Scott, have you? I mean,
know that-
we're assuming ecology is fine with it, but has there been any conversation with ecology?
So maybe, I know Scott here's in the wings. I think we've done some initial reports. I guess there's no guarantees, I think, is what I remember the recollection being, in terms of there's no imminent thing that they're going to do. Again, the county has asserted the fact that they are in compliance. I think we've always been concerned about what happens 2 years from now, 3 years from now, is would they actually come back and do something, and what would be our responsibility? And to the point earlier, I think when we were, part of the reason we were at somewhat a stalemate, if you will, really the only thing to do would be to somehow carve out the Hawks Glen neighborhood from the annexation and then start over again. And that sort of begs the question about, does this area ever get annexed because of there's a facility out there that somehow the county and the city can't somehow work toward a resolution? I think ultimately what we want to do, and some of the good faith languages in there, is that if there's a possibility to upgrade the system and eliminate any concern from an environmental standpoint, that's what that language is in there for too.
Is the study that the county applied for and received, is that still going to move forward?
So the county received ecology dollars for a groundwater recharge study that potentially could use this water. They're in the study phase. We don't know the outcome of that is. If something productive comes out, that would be part of the reliance on this language, that if they wanted to do something that would change the outfall, that potentially could be a potential project.
Yeah. I mean, this has been dragging on and dragging on and dragging on. And so I like I said, through all the conversations that we've had with the county, it feels like there's an opportunity here for the county to use some of these use this well to recharge the groundwater, much like we do in Lacey, and give them some credits on for their water rights things. And so there's an opportunity for us to continue to work together. And you know, it's just time. It's way past time we come to a resolution on this. And so again,
I know Scott's here. He maybe have some information in regards to this.
So Doug Christensen, our stormwater manager, did have a conversation with the Department of Ecology well over a year and a half ago. He said, I had a brief discussion about this pump system with two people at Ecology, our municipal stormwater permit manager and one of the lead permit writers. Their main message was that annexing is a buyer beware situation. When we annex an area, we inherit the problems and they become our responsibility. If there are inadequate stormwater controls in place, they stress that it would be the city's best interest to address any perceived inadequacies. If the water quality treatment is inadequate, we become responsible to retrofit the system. But Ecology can't strictly require it. However, such a situation would be a good candidate for a water quality retrofit grant, since inheriting a problem and proposing a fix it on a competitive grant application would make a strong case and help with scoring points. Other concerns would include maintenance, blah, blah, blah. Said we would need to include annex facility in our mapping system. The existing discharge of the creek would be more of a potential issue for other agencies besides Ecology, such as Fish and Wildlife or DNR. Recall that our existing discharge to Chambers Lake at the Chambers Lake outfall led to an outfall agreement, easement agreement with various stipulations and a fee. So anyway, that was it. It's just, you know, their advice was just go into it eyes wide open. And as both the city manager and Dave said, it's kind of challenging to write language around something you don't know.
is there any other conversation here?
There's a motion, right?
Yeah, there's a motion in a second.
Hey,
All those
just
in
real
favor-
quick,
Go ahead.
have we used this language with the county before in doing other things with them? Is this kind of a jumping off point to refine, to where we're going to be able to continually refine this MOU and add language to it? I'm just trying to make sure. I'm trying to understand how do we get to a point of refinement from such, a vast and
Well, clearly, I think the language provides maximum flexibility. I mean, we did have earlier drafts that said, hey, let's make this a 50-50 proposition. But there could also be a scenario where why would the city pay 50% of a project that really didn't benefit residents, our residents 50%? And again, I think the county somewhat also paused on that type of language too, because they felt like, well, what are we talking about? Again, I think it became problematic to try to figure out every possible scenario. Hence, you have language that basically makes it a little bit more flexible to try to be a good faith partner in local government trying to work together to solve a joint problem.
And the language is intentionally, hard to pin somebody down. I mean, in good faith is a term of art. It's used in other agreements, and frankly, it's used when you can't come to an exact agreement on the specific terms.
Councilor Kunkel.
In 20 years of selling real estate, I have never seen a nebulous kind of contract actually fare out well for anybody. Like we've already discussed, there's too much nebulous language as far as who's going to be responsible for what. You have to also ask yourself, what is the motivation for getting this done sooner rather than maybe doing some more diligence on what we're going to be faced with? So that's my input.
Well, I tell you what, it's been over 2 years of negotiating with this. I guess what it comes down to is the city, is the county a partner, or are they an adversary, right? And so
Well, we're both looking out for our own interests and they don't always
we
align.
both
That's really the point.
we both serve the exact same resident in this case. And I think we need to do what's best for the resident. And instead of carving this out and never annexing it ever because of a water system or a stormwater system, let's figure out ways that we continue to work together and serve the resident. And at the end of the day, they're not our adversary. They shouldn't be an adversary.
Well,
I think this.
And I think you're making a reasonable statement, Mayor, and I agree with you. I think that we could find a reasonable conclusion prior to committing to this contract. And that's where I'm at.
Well, I wish we could. It's 2 years. Here we are 2 years later, and this is what we got. I'm just telling you.
This is going to take time.
And maybe to share, and I don't know if this is helpful or not or additive, but I think everything that council has vocalized, staff has tried to address those issues. And I think normally when you annex, we don't even look at these separate facilities. We would basically annex it. We would own the portion of there. We would not have the 1 year time transition of that. It would just be, we just absorb it. There would be no sort of language that, okay, you have your system out there. We don't pay attention to it. There's no language that will work together. I mean, to some degree, you could argue that this is better than an absence of an agreement, because typically we would just absorb those facilities. Yeah, I would agree. It's not perfect, but I think, again, if we're acting as good faith actors, we're trying to at least address something that if we go forward with annexation, this is the rules of engagement.
So if we go forward, what we're really talking about is taking on a 10-year-old water system.
It's actually older than that. It was built in the 98. It's a
30-year-old.
Yeah, it's a stormwater system. So here, I'm sorry, I forgot there's some council members who weren't here when this first came up. So we went through this is a owner initiated annexation that that actually came all the way down from Martin Way to the regional athletic complex. That's not in the city of Lacey, by the way. And so since it came all the way down to that property, if you looked at the map, you add the city of Lacey's own property in the Nisqually Public Schools, there was an opportunity for us to bring that whole area into the city of Lacey. And so that's what we proposed. It was a sort of a narrow annexation along those lines. We went to the boundary review board, and the county intervened and said, no, we don't want you just annexing this area. We want you annexing a lot of residential area on one side and a lot of residential area on the other side, which was been almost like doubled our what we were talking about. And we're like, whoa. Calm
And
down.
there's a great point. There's a great point about separate interests.
Yeah. And so, but we came together and agreed. It's like, okay, let's shrink this back down to something that we can both agree on. And that's what happened. And then it was going through the process, literally on the last day of during the public hearing on the county side of it. We'd already done our work. A resident piped up and said, hey, there's a stormwater system in here that the county that we didn't know about. And so it passed, and then the annexation was ready to go, and it's before us now, and we've paused on it saying, hey, let's talk about this stormwater system. And so that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years. Lenny.
Just one additional question. Why are we taking action at this at a work session rather than at a council meeting?
So this is just the MOU. We still have to come back and take the action to do the annexation at a later date.
Two separate issues. I understand that. Why are we taking action on the MOU? And I understand that we're allowed to. I get we're allowed to take action at these meetings, but why would we do it here and not at a regular public meeting?
Well, in this circumstance, this is just been ongoing behind the scenes conversations that's been happening between the county and the city of Lacey, right? Okay. I mean, but that's why this is a formality in the process.
I don't agree with that personally, but I think this should be taken up at a council meeting for discussion and a vote.
Okay. So it didn't start out that way, but somebody else on council jumped up and says, let's just
Yeah.
move it forward, because it's just a briefing, really.
Mhm.
But we now have a motion on the floor.
Motion is second.
Yes,
All those in favor of having the city manager sign this MOU, say aye or raise your hand.
aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Then the motion carries. Next up, Scott.
Yeah, so the question was brought up at the last work session about, is it feasible to do in-person city council meetings? And I asked Dave just to look at the legality of that, and wanted Dave to kind of share what the, I guess, the requirements are if we decided to do in-person meetings under COVID-19.
Yes, thanks, Scott. That's right. So this conversation came up last time. I think there's some other jurisdictions, Yelm perhaps, that's doing a bit of a hybrid model. And I've actually reached out to them. I haven't got any specific information back on how that's working yet or what they're doing, but you know, legally, the city certainly can return to a form of in-person meeting. Now, there's requirements that are going to be necessary for the city to meet in order to meet in person. And a lot of them, you know, you can presume. One, of course, is 50% capacity of the room. So this, if we're using council chambers, at a minimum, only half the people that would normally be allowed for capacity purposes could attend. Masks would be mandatory for anybody in the building. 6-foot social distancing would be required to be put in place. There's a requirement that the city or the holder of the meeting, in this case, it would be the city, retain a COVID-19 program supervisor. And this person needs to be present, and the focus for them would be to ensure that the masking is followed and that the social distancing is followed. There would be a requirement for pre-registration for those attending, and that the city retain their contact information for presumably contact tracing purposes. There's a necessity that entrances and exits be staggered so that there's not theoretically a rush of people at the same time. And this would be something that the COVID-19 program supervisor would be tasked with monitoring. There's a recommendation that entry times be staggered to achieve that same purpose. So,
Thank you. I thank you. I know you're shaking your head, Ed, but these are the rules. So is anyone really interested in having, under these rules, meeting in person?
Not under those rules.
No. No.
I have a question.
I guess if I knew everybody was vaccinated and we could still wear masks and space out, that would be just great.
But yeah, we don't.
I guess we'll take our time catching up with the rest of the country, but you know, but whatever.
Malcolm?
Dave, what I hear all the things that you're saying have to happen and the resources. What would that look like for us? You know, because we're kind of a one entry, one exit kind of a situation there with those doors on the northern, northwest, you know, northeast side of the building there, next to the parking lot. And so what would that, in terms of making something like that work for us, what would that look like? I mean, would we be using a full-time employee or would we have to bring on somebody to supervise the entering and leaving the building? And then we wouldn't be able to use our usual seats because those aren't 6 feet apart. So then we're setting up tables and measuring 6 feet and then what you said, I think those were the bigger points, right?
The last meeting that we actually attended in person, and I believe that you were there, it would be similar to that. We certainly wouldn't be able to use the traditional seating. There's questions as to whether staff should even be present, because that's going to suck up a lot of usable space. And how the entire council would be present, let alone leaving a room. I think the city manager probably has better insights onto how many seats could be made available. But logistically, that would be tough. So I don't know how that would look specifically. I think I would recommend that staff take some time in putting a plan together in place, because the concern I would have is that the city would be found to be violating and rushing to public and whatnot and putting people at risk.
Councilmember Cox.
Well, an important part of public access to our meetings is the televising of that on Thurston County media. It seems like that would be they would be pretty hindered in their ability to have broadcast an intelligible meeting with masks, with, you know, trying to photograph a hollow rectangle table from multiple directions, from if there are staff being up in other parts of the room. I think it would be very difficult.
I agree. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not interested in under those conditions going back. Is there anyone interested in going back under those conditions? Councilor Stedman?
It just goes back to one of my main principles is no matter what we enact or how we enact it or when. I mean, in 1919, they wore masks at sporting events, baseball games. No one saw people wearing them at baseball games, even 5 years after that. Whatever it looks like, we just have to be fair and equal to everybody concerned, no matter how they feel, mask, no mask, whatever. You have to respect every person individually and how they feel. And if we can enact that, then I'm all for it.
Okay. Is there any other questions?
I
You have something
guess,
again?
I guess if we put together, I mean, can we look at a plan? I mean, not saying that we have to just jump in and make that happen in a week or a month or whatever the case may be, but you know, I guess there is some interest. So maybe we could look at, you know, what a floor plan would look like for that situation and review it or something. Is that something that can happen?
Yeah.
Lenny, you got some?
I would just say, under those conditions, based on what Dave just told us, I mean, I think it'd be a waste of staff time to put any time or effort into this at this point. I think we need to just wait. As much as I would much prefer to be at council chambers, and I think to do our job correctly and to serve the public, I think we need to be there. But if those are still the rules based on from the state, and obviously we're not going to violate state rules, then I think we just have to wait. I mean, to have meetings with masks and distancing is never going to work in that space.
Yeah. Carolyn, and I think we're I mean, is there anyone interested? I'm not interested in meeting. I want to get back as soon as we possibly can, but I'm not interested in meeting under those rules. So is there anyone interested? Is there a majority of people interested in meeting under those rules?
No.
Okay, thank you. Then let's go on to the American Rescue Plan Act.
Carolyn has, oh,
Well, I just would like to make a request of staff, and that is, I'm sure you're already thinking ahead, but to investigate equipment that would help us better have hybrid meetings in future, because I think that's probably, we're not going to just jump in one step. I think we're going to have to, and there may be ways we're going to need to bring in more people. So, and I would be willing to invest in some better equipment to make that happen.
also, we tend to get quite a few people on Zoom that we haven't before. We usually have an empty house usually, so people are participating, and that, I think that helps to have a hybrid. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, I was gonna make that same comment. So we are investigating the hybrid model. I mean, we think that is the future. I think clearly we've had greater participation by people having the ability to Zoom in. And even I think at the later stages of COVID, we're gonna probably need that bridge, if you will, to make people feel comfortable either coming into a public setting like that, but also have flexibility.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Next agenda item.
Okay, so again, last work session, because you have a joint work session with the Board of County Commissioners, That is, and you're going to have a discussion point on there that talks about the American Rescue Plan Act. I think you want to just have a little bit of discussion. So when you went to that meeting, it wasn't just, cold. So the purpose tonight is to give you kind of a general overview of the American Rescue Plan Act, talk about some of the money that is being funneled through the states and local government. We're going to share with you some internal brainstorming that staff did. Again, this is not suggesting council should do this. If you just want to, provide you that, we have put some thought into this. Clearly, this is going to be council's final recommendation where they think is best to invest these dollars. So I'm going to share a screen here, if you indulge me. And let me know if you could see that.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, as you know, $1.9 trillion was passed by Congress on March 11th and signed into law by the president. $360 billion of that is going to go to local governments. Specifically, the cities of our size are going to get a distribution out of a pot of $45.6 billion. It's hard to fathom what $1.9 trillion is. I actually did look it up. Apparently, if you stacked 1.9 trillion $1 bills, it's about 68,000 miles. That's about 1/3 to the moon. So just to give you some scope and scale, what 1.9 trillion, or actually, that's just $1 trillion.
That's cool. That's quite a picture there, Scott. Thank you.
There you go. So in terms of, this is good for council to know too, because again, there is a lot of effort being put in certain programs. So there's going to be about $1 billion that provides temporary assistance for families. There's going to be the individual assistance paychecks, which you've heard about, the $1,400. There's going to be about $21.6 billion in emergency rental assistance. The home program, which that we're part of, they're going to give an infusion of $5 billion. Housing Choice Vouchers is going to receive another $5 billion. Homeowners Assistance Fund is going to get $10 billion. And then Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program is going to get $4.5 billion.
Scott, question for that. Those dollars are all in addition to the 56 million that the county's getting and the 11 that we're getting and all that. This is in addition to any of that, correct?
Right. Now, some of those will be funneled through those various programs. So again, like we're part of home, so we'll be touched or we'll benefit from some of that. But yeah, these are on top of the direct dollars that we're receiving.
Okay.
SNAP program, $1.1 billion. Other nutritional programs are going to get just under $1 billion. Federal unemployment benefits, you get $300. You've heard that in the news. Emergency paid leave, $5 billion. Older American Act, $1.4 billion. And then some other programs just under $200 million.
What's the Older American Act?
Correct. And then so school districts are going to get $123 billion. Direct business, so the PPP program is going to get another $7.25 billion. Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, $15 billion. Economic Development, or EDA, is going to get $3 billion. Public Transit is going to get just under $31 billion. And the Disaster Relief Fund, which we can somewhat access for COVID relief, is going to get $50 billion. So that's a lot of money. So specifically, Lacey is getting $11.45 million. It's hard to say million after saying billion for a couple times there. So we are going to get this in two separate allocations. We're going to get half of that in the first 60 days, where you think before May, and then we are going to get the second half once we get the first half after over a year period or 12 months. Very important to point out that we're going to have until December 31st, 2024 to spend or draw down those funds. So there is time to make good decisions where those monies should be spent. Some guidelines in terms of when the city receives those funds, how can we utilize those funds? So clearly you can respond to the public health emergency of COVID-19. You can provide those to workers performing essential work. You can provide revenue in response to reduction in revenue caused by COVID-19. There is an allowance for investment in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. You can also take these funds and transfer them to private nonprofit organizations meeting those same tenets, also to other mass transit organizations or special purpose organizations. One thing that you cannot do, if we had our own pension fund, some cities have their own pension fund, you can't use that to offset that or supplement that. And you can't use the dollars to say, hey, we're not going to raise taxes for the next 2-3 years, and then use the American Rescue Plan Act dollars to avoid that. So the idea is that we're putting those back into the community. Some just policy considerations, obviously you can use this to backfill revenue shortfalls. We're, even from a staff perspective, we realize this is one-time money, so we do not want to invest in dollars that are going to cause an ongoing liability in the future that we can't afford. So we're being mindful of that. We also think it's a good idea to leverage existing partnerships. As I mentioned, there are a lot of pots of money out there that we're not even aware of yet. That's either going to come from the state level, maybe even the county level. And are there programs that maybe those monies or programs should be utilized first before we use our $11.45 million? So again, kind of the strategic thought, we do have time to spend this money to make good decisions. And let's not basically duplicate programs that are pre-existing from the act, such as from the federal state government. So again, these are just ideas. This is not to, it's just to help with the discussion, but we kind of broke these up as internal uses and external uses. And idea here is just to kind of give you some ideas when we have this discussion. So when we looked at this, obviously we used $2.4 million in this year's budget to balance the budget. That would be an appropriate use for that. Any expenses related to COVID-19, you could use this money for. When we're talking about, again, better able to response, we just mentioned the council chambers, how to do hybrid meetings. That's kind of a response to COVID. We could do upgrades to city council chambers to invest in that technology. If we're trying to provide more accessibility options for our customers in a time of COVID, I think any one-time money to do technological upgrades is a fair discussion to have. When you talk about facilities, again, you could do sort of a touchless features throughout City Hall. So again, surface transmission was an early concern with COVID-19. We could do mobile restrooms with hand washing stations. We can do other capital improvements in our parks. Again, sort of with a public health mindset. That's something that we could do. Economic development is also a key factor with the American Rescue Plan Act. You could do a sewer project, and that would maybe set us up for future economic development in an area that we are seeing that is maybe economically disadvantaged. If you maybe put money into Museum and Cultural Center, again, that could be a potential tourism draw. That would be, again, an appropriate use of those funds. When you think of external uses, maybe there is more money needed for the Lacey Food Bank. Again, you're helping those that have been mostly affected by COVID. That would be a fair discussion to have. When you talk about individual assistance, we did recognize there should be maybe residential rental assistance, commercial rental assistance, but we do believe there's state dollars out there. So maybe those are programs that should be tapped in first before we use our direct allocation. And again, there are a whole host of economic recovery development ideas that can be potentially implemented. So we just had some, we could dedicate funds to minority-owned and women-owned businesses since they've been disadvantaged even prior to COVID, but I think you could make a good justification for providing some kind of program. You can dedicate funds again to mid-sized businesses through a grant program. So again, that would also be an appropriate use. I think a lot of the energy that even staff recognize that we are dealing with a significant homeless problem. And I think staff has always struggled to even give good policy recommendations to council because we've never had the funding. So some of the ideas that were identified is that should we go ahead and invest in getting a second homeless coordinator like we had with Mitch? Mitch did some great work. We're going to backfill that position, but do another one. Should we have a sort of a counterpart to the community resource unit that's in the police, but make it a civilian-based unit, but provide a mental health specialist and a social service specialist, and maybe run that for 2 years? Not knowing, knowing that it's going to maybe run out 2 years, but maybe you try to do a 2-year block to try to deal with our most significant issues when it comes to, say, homeless situations. And then, there's housing discussions that we can have. Should we develop the community action council property off the 32nd? That's been a discussion in the past. We now maybe have some funds that we can invest in that. We have city-owned property that we've identified for potential affordable housing units. We can do that. There's been discussion about the Marysville Shelter Resource Model. Do we have, the potential to do something like that and recreate that? Can we do a partnership with Province to deal with mental health and drug addiction issues? And maybe there's a big regional project out there that we can actually put some funds toward. So As you know, we're going to go to a council retreat on April 23rd to kind of have a deep dive in this discussion. But I know we're going to have a discussion with the Board of County Commissioners, and it just kind of makes sense to have this discussion because this is going to be a regional partner. They're getting $56 million, and they may have some ideas on how we can actually move some major issues forward, given that we have resources.
Good. So before we go any further, I just want to say, and Scott, you know this is coming. I don't think it's been a penny of this money or even think about. I appreciate all the work you did on this, Scott, but until we can have a regional conversation on how the best to allocate these dollars and what myself and I know other council members agree is our biggest issue, which is coming up with supportive housing units for those who find themselves homeless. I don't want to spend a moment talking about that until we can have a regional conversation, because the $11 million seems like lots of money, but it's not hardly anything unless you work with the other jurisdictions and come up with a plan on how to best use of that. Lenny?
The only thing I would add to that is I really believe before the regional conversation, we have to have a council conversation. We can't go into a regional conversation until we know where this council is on the issue of spending the money before we can talk to our counterparts in other jurisdictions. So I think we need to have that conversation as soon as possible. And it's coming up pretty soon here with our retreat. But I think that's the step that has to happen first.
I would agree with that. Deputy Mayor?
Well, I agree with both what you're saying, but what I would like is to have access to the slides so I can kind of absorb it, so that when we do go to someplace where we're having a discussion, I have some kind of realistic thing of what's possible. Because right now, just kind of winging it is a little hard for me.
Councilmember Cox.
To the mayor's points, we now have a regional housing council, and I think that might be a good arena for some of these conversations to take place. So as your representative to that, I would, and Councilmember Greenstein is also on there. Let us take that. And Mayor, you, I think, would be welcome to attend one of those meetings and to express your point of view. But I think you're spot on about the need for supportive housing, low-income housing, and that may be the vehicle where we have a regional table there to start looking at trying to make those happen.
So what I would suggest is that, as soon as possible, maybe next work session, before, when's our meeting with the county?
Next Thursday.
Well, can we at least all agree that everyone needs to take, before we agree to spend a penny of these dollars, that we take a deep breath and pause to have a regional conversation first. And I will be urging the county, Olympia, Tumwater to do the same. This is once in a lifetime dollars. We'll never, we will never see this money again. And so if you just won the lottery, you don't want to go out and just blow it all on stuff. Let's make an investment that we can all, be proud of going forward. And so I would agree that we need to have some regional conversations. And I would encourage the other jurisdictions to not go out there and spend this money on a whole host of, I'm sure, good causes, but doesn't move the needle on what I think is our biggest crisis that we're facing right now. So I hope this council would at least agree to that. We would agree to pause and encourage the other jurisdictions to pause and let's talk about this first. It's 2024 before we have to spend a penny of that. Can we at least agree that we won't spend it until we can have some more conversations? Can we get some consensus around that? Yeah. Okay. So then let's go, at least go into the conversation next Thursday with saying, hey, we agree we won't spend this money until we at least have some conversations regionally about how we can multiply these dollars, hopefully, for the community.
Can we get the slides though?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, Councilor Miller.
Yeah, I saw some things on there that I like, and I'm grateful that staff took time to kind of, you know, assess our needs as a city. You know, over the past year, I think the things that citizens have been contacting me or us the most about are you know, they're getting tired of seeing homeless people, you know, taking over or squatting on public lands. And it looks like we may have an opportunity to do something about that. I didn't, without, you know, jumping ahead of a conversation, I didn't know if the Capital City project is something that we could reimburse ourselves for. I guess we'll take a deeper dive into that kind of stuff when we do have a meeting. But, you know, from what I saw on those slides, you know, that it looks like, you know, the team and the staff has taken the time to try to assess our needs and put those forward. And we have some other issues that, you know, people have been writing us about. So we're going to have a very full 3 hours on April 23rd before we jump into conversation with other jurisdictions.
Councilor Cox.
In addition to the slide deck that Scott is sending us, I emailed to all of you a slide deck from a webinar that the mayor and I both attended that talks about how we can use these funds to, they say eliminate, but we certainly reduce homelessness, to help with the rental addiction crisis that we know is coming and other things. And there are links to all kinds of resources on there as well. So good material, and I hope you all will dive in a little bit.
And I think the good thing coming out of that seminar is, again, let's not spend money on things that other pots of money it's currently could provide. So I think, you know, what I hope that we can take away with this is everyone just needs to, you know, chill for a second. You know, let's not let this money burn a hole in your pockets, and let's see how we can hopefully multiply these dollars, work regionally, and see what we can come up with. I'm not saying we can get there, but I'm saying let's try first, for sure. So, anything else? Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. And we're at the end of this work session, so I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Bye-bye.
Bye.